Good morning, everyone. This is Kathleen coming to you live from Helena with Inspired Classroom, who is facilitating this discussion. Bozeman, Lynn, we see you. We see that you're there, but you can give us your camera now and your speakers, because I'm going to turn the time over to Lori Wolf from FWP, and we're going to go ahead and get started. We have approximately 6 classes on the live stream right now. Colstrip is there, Barker Homeschool is there, Kalispell, and several others. So if students or classrooms, if you are on the live stream, would you please type in the chat box where you are so that we know who we're talking with. And I'm sort of vamping here. Lynn, go ahead and turn on your camera so we can see Bozeman.
It's on, Kathleen.
Oh, okay, because all I see is Lynn with a video crossed out. So, okay, let's go ahead and get started. Lori Wolf from FWP.
Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. I want to thank the panel members for taking time out of their busy day. I want to thank you students for joining us today for this live event. And before we get started, I want to thank a few donors who, out of their generosity, made it possible for this to happen. And that would be the Montana Outdoor Legacy Foundation, the Claiborne Ortenberg Foundation, the Denny and Phyllis Washington Foundation, the Weyerhaeuser Foundation, and Cabela's. And then,
That's a mouthful.
and if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be able to do these distance learning programs. So I want to make sure that I give those folks recognition. Also, I want to go over just a few ground rules before we get started. And this is not only for our panel members, but also for any of you students that are joining us. And yes, even when you become an adult, there are ground rules, just like you have in class. And some of these ground rules will sort of just help facilitate this event even smoother. And so the first thing is, let's be respectful with each other. Let's make sure that we're valuing differences. Also, let's not interrupt each other. As Kathleen explained from Inspired Classrooms, this technology does have a little bit of a delay, so make sure that you're giving that time. Also, I'm going to ask that your questions be on point and they're not rambling. It just makes it easier with the technology, but also for all the panel members to understand them. And then when we answer, that our answers are brief and concise. And then the last thing I'm going to ask is please make sure that your phones are either shut off or on silent mode. And also, when you are done speaking, if you're joining us, make sure your mics go back on mute. All right, thanks everybody for joining. Okay, so let's start introducing here. It'll be easier. So go ahead and we're going to start introducing the panel members. So Nick Jivak, do you want to start off by introducing yourself and what your role is in Grizzly Bears, in conservation management?
You bet, thanks. So I'm Nick Jivak, and I'm the Conservation Director for the Montana Wildlife Federation, and we are the state's oldest wildlife conservation organization. We were formed in 1936 when hunters and landowners came together to restore depleted wildlife in our state. And for many decades, we were focused on restoring deer and elk and antelope and the big game ungulates that everybody likes to hunt. And we had remarkable success with that throughout Montana's history. But the one thing we weren't so great at managing in the state were predator species. And of course, it was a different attitude as people were settling the West and working, frankly, to eradicate these species, including gray wolves, mountain lions, and grizzly bears. And a big game changer in wildlife conservation in our country was the passage in the 1973 of the Endangered Species Act, which is a very powerful law that says we will not let species blank out. And 2 years after that law was passed, 1975, grizzly bears went on that list. For a few years, grizzly bear recovery really struggled, and I hope people understand where we were with this species at that time. There was a time in Yellowstone Park where there was an estimated fewer than 140 bears there. So we were really in dire straits, and in the early 80s, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service instituted a very aggressive grizzly recovery plan, and it has taken us many decades to build this species back. And today, we're at a point where we feel like these species, grizzly bears, should be taken off the list, at least in the populations in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem and in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So our role with Montana Wildlife Federation, we know how to live with bears in these core areas of Yellowstone and the surrounding public lands and in Glacier Park and in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. So much of our discussion today is how to manage the bears that have pushed out of that habitat. And we've worked on a lot of mitigation programs to prevent conflicts between livestock, people, and grizzly bears to help facilitate that. And I think we'll talk about that today. So,
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
Gary?
Yeah, I'm Gary Bertolotti. I'm the regional supervisor for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks out of Great Falls. And my role is to basically manage all the natural resources that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has the authority over along the Rocky Mountain front, out into the prairies in our Region 4 of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And Fish, Wildlife, and Parks' overall objective and responsibilities are to manage all wildlife species, recreational opportunities, fish species, and natural resources in the state. Related to grizzly bears, my role along the Rocky Mountain front, which is that Northern Continental Divide ecosystem, is to look at the success story of recovery of grizzly bears and what we need to do next from the respect of numbers of grizzly bears on the landscape, the presence of grizzly bears and what they represent from the standpoint of private landowners, public lands, recreationalists, and how we're going to, as an agency, manage those large carnivores on a landscape that has changed from what it was back in the 1800s and early 1900s. And as we go forward, trying to work with our partners to get this species off the endangered species list and then manage into the future so that we have foundational population levels that are not going to be diminished, and then how we manage it from the standpoint of all the vested interest parties out there, private landowners, recreationalists, and the people we serve.
Morning, everybody. I'm Mark Lambrecht. I'm Director of Government Affairs for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. We are a national nonprofit organization. Its headquarters is in Missoula, Montana. We have 234,000 members nationwide and 12,000 volunteers. The main thing we do is try to ensure the future of elk, other wildlife, including grizzlies, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. Since 1984, when we were founded, we have protected or enhanced almost 7.5 million acres of habitat across the country and opened up public access for recreation to over 1.2 million acres nationwide. We strongly believe in the North American model of wildlife conservation, particularly with regard to predators such as grizzlies and wolves. We believe that efforts such as these ought to be managed by Montana Fish Wildlife Parks, and that should include regulated hunting. And I look forward to your questions.
Okay, Trina.
I am Trina Bradley. I am Vice President of Marias River Livestock Association. I represent the ranchers specifically on this panel. My husband and I ranch south of Browning, and we have a ton of bears on our ranch. And so my goal is to make sure that the bears are being managed correctly so that we don't drop below that threshold so that they can get off the endangered species list. So I am looking forward to your questions as well.
Thank you. So let's go to Bozeman. Can they hear me, Kathleen? Bozeman.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, woo. So, but let's go to Danielle Euler.
Okay, hang on. It was
second.
Lynn, is your computer on as well? You may have dueling microphones.
Yes.
No. Not very, little bit. While we're working on sound, let's go ahead and have Erin in Missoula introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Erin. I am Erin Edge. I work with Defenders of Wildlife. Defenders of Wildlife is a national nonprofit organization. We have about 2 million members worldwide, and then we have about 5,000 members in the state of Montana. I've been working with Defenders for about 13 years, and my role is to work on grizzly bear and wolf conservation issues. My grizzly bear work carries me to Wyoming, Idaho, and then Montana, and a little bit in eastern Washington. Before Defenders, I worked for a little small nonprofit in Missoula called Brown Bear Resources on outreach and education on just staying safe in bear country. In the 1990s, Defenders realized that grizzly bears were recovering in areas, but we also realized that with that came conflicts with people. And so we started a grizzly bear compensation program, which would compensate livestock producers for livestock lost to grizzly bears, paying market value for a grizzly bear confirmed killed livestock, and then we paid 50% for probable kills by grizzly bears. And then we also started our conflict prevention program, and we've spent about $700,000 since the early 1990s on conflict prevention projects across the state of Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. And then now we are actually starting to do some in eastern Washington as well. And so that's my role. I also work on policy, so addressing management policy changes, whether that be with the state, with the Fish and Wildlife Service, forest policy, just to ensure that grizzly bears have the protections they need to continue to recovery.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and go to Mitch.
Sounds good. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. Well, my name is Mitch Doherty. I'm the Conservation Manager with the Vital Ground Foundation. We're a land trust based in Missoula, Montana. Our mission is to protect and restore grizzly bear habitat and populations throughout North America. And as part of that, we also support conflict prevention programs like some of the work Erin mentioned. And the primary tools we use to accomplish our mission include conservation easements and purchasing property as well to protect habitat. We also have a program that supports the conflict prevention work, so we don't do projects on the ground, but we support those who do through financial grants and those things. So that's Vital Ground. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mitch. So let's go to Bozeman.
Let's quickly go to Bozeman. Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hi everybody, my name is Danielle Woodward. I'm the education coordinator for the Montana Bear Education Working Group. Our group is comprised of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, the Fish, Wildlife and Parks, the Wildlife Management Institute, Wildlife Conservation Society, and People and Carnivores. And our group's goals are to allow people to have information about how to be safe in bear country, increase knowledge and awareness of where bears are, where they might show up, and help people live with bears. Another topic we've tackled is to create a consistent message so everybody's saying the same information about bear safety across our region. So that's our goal. Our group came together about 3 years ago to address the need for all of the topics I just discussed across our whole area, and it's been a great format for us to collaborate and everybody involved in the project to get on the same page and reach a lot of different people. Last year in 2018, we talked to about 23,000 people in Montana, and we trained almost 9,000 people on the use of bear spray. So we have a lot of folks that help in our group, and we speak to a lot of people, and our whole objective is to get bear information and awareness out there. So that's why I'm here today.
Hi, I'm Julie York. I'm a wildlife biologist with the Forest Service. I work on the Custer-Gallatin National Forest, which is a large forest that is adjacent to Yellowstone National Park to the north. I'm based out of Gardner, which is a small town right next to Yellowstone. I work on projects from Gardner to Livingston to Red Lodge, which surrounds the large historic Beartooth Wilderness, where we do have a lot of grizzly bears. So I work with grizzly bears in two ways. The first way is through education. I work a lot with Danielle with her working group. We have several seasonal bear aware technicians that work May to September, and they patrol campgrounds, they interact with the public, they do events all across the zone. And so they work closely to educate not only public, the visitors from all ages, but also Forest Service staff on ways to interact with bears and to how you can live and work in bear country more safely. So I work with Danielle a lot all summer and throughout the rest of the year too to work on improving that messaging. And then the second way I work with grizzly bears is primarily through writing biological assessments. So we have a lot of projects that can affect grizzly bears on the forest. Those can be timber work, road building, trail building, a whole lot of different projects that can affect them. So I work on teams to look at ways to reducing those impacts. And then I also work with the Forest Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, on consulting on reducing those impacts. So it's a lot of actually writing and looking at habitat models, analyzing data. A fair part of my job in general is actually writing. So that's kind of the two components that I work with grizzly bears. Thanks for having me.
Hi everybody, my name is Kim Johnston and I'm the Field Project Manager for People and Carnivores. I work on large carnivore prevention in southwest Montana. People and Carnivores is a nonprofit organization that works to restore and reconnect large carnivore populations while working with the region's peoples to reduce human-carnivore conflict. And our goal is to keep people on their property safe while keeping large carnivores such as grizzly bears, mountain lions, and wolves wild. We work with landowners, local communities, ranchers, hikers, sportsmen's groups, as well as local agencies and tribes to find ways to reduce conflicts with carnivores. And we use a variety of prevention tools to mitigate conflicts, tools like electric fencing, bear-resistant garbage cans, backcountry bear food poles to keep bears from accessing food sources and attractants. We recommend temporary deterrents like scare devices that take advantage of a carnivore's wariness of human activity. We recommend things like livestock guard dogs, range riders, and herders to be incorporated in livestock practices to reduce conflicts, as well as carcass management programs. We also emphasize the importance of bear safety training and bear spray as another way to reduce conflicts. And by using these different prevention tools, we hope to keep bears and other wildlife wild, and again, people and their property safe. So if anyone has any questions about conflict prevention, feel free to ask during the discussion.
Okay, that's everyone.
Okay, great, thank you. So we're getting some questions coming in, and we're going to go ahead and just dive into those questions. Students that you're out there, if you have questions, please make sure that you're either typing them in, or you can but we'll go ahead with the first question. And what I'll do is I'll try to read the question and point it towards the person that might be most applicable towards answering it, as well as opening it up for other panel members to comment on. So the first question I have is from
Colstrip.
I'll take from Colstrip, and the question I got from Colstrip is, where do bears cause the most problems with invading human spaces? And then I will also kind of counter that with what types of places have the most problems with bears. That might be a better one. So what types of places have the most problems with bears? And why don't we have that go to, I'm going to pick you, Nick, as a general one. What have you heard? And we'll kind of go down through the panel.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it's safe to say that, looking at the camera. You know, bigger picture, there are places where clearly bears are preferred in the heart of the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and there are places where they are not preferred in downtown Valier. And, you know, we know that anywhere bears can come into contact with people can be a problem. But that said, it's sort of that transition zone, places like Trina's Ranch, where they can be problems. And what we don't want are bears attacking livestock or, you know, coming really close to human habitation. So the key is to minimize those conflicts through measures to keep attractants that draw them near people as basic as leaving your grill out overnight in Big Sky, or creating attractants that draw bears very near people and where they can get into trouble. Because when bears attack livestock, that is a lose, 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 I say. I mean, the bear is either killed or translocated. A rancher has lost livestock, which is their livelihood, and our federal and state agencies have to put tremendous resources into dealing with it. So, I think what we're talking about a lot is that transition zone. I mean, bears can live on private land, on ranches, if they're off, away from homes and not, near people's livestock. There's a lot of, private landowners, ranchers, and farmers provide tremendous habitat for our public wildlife in this state. So that's where they come into problems, is when they're really close to human habitation and livestock, I would say.
Okay. And I'm going to follow that up with another question that we got in, and maybe Trina, you could address this. As a livestock owner, are there any precautions that you have taken to keep bears out?
Okay, so to address the first question, I fully agree with Nick. The issue isn't really where the bears are, it's the behavior of the bears. So we have good bears and we have bad bears. And the good bears we rarely even see. We see their tracks by the creek, or we see that they walked through the hayfield, or we see that they dug up a gopher hole or something. The bears that we have a problem with are the ones that are in our yard playing on my daughter's swing, or, you go out and our dog is barking at them, but they don't care because they're not scared of people anymore. And those are the ones that are the issue. So in order to keep everyone happy, we need to keep those bears wild and keep them afraid of people, and then everyone gets along a lot better. For the second question, precautions. I do have one electric fence on our ranch, and that is for my daughter's 4-H lamb, and it works really well. We do not have electric fencing around our calving lot because it just isn't feasible the way that our calving lot is set up, and thankfully we haven't had any issues. We do have to pasture our cows differently in the spring when we first turn them out, because we live on Birch Creek, so there's miles of trees and creek, and that's where the bears like to be. And so we have a really nice pasture there, but we can't use it because our calves are too young and they don't survive in that pasture. So we have started putting old cows in that pasture, or bulls, or whatever, not baby calves. And the other thing is, we really have to watch them closely during calving, because the bears will come in and not necessarily just kill the calves, but they'll wind the cows up, and then the cows end up trampling the calves. And that is collateral damage that is not covered under the Livestock Loss Board. So if we lose 5 calves in a stampede, that's just too bad for us. And that's at least $5,000 that we just lost out on. So those are the kinds of issues with bears. So I am working on getting a livestock guard dog, which I think will be an excellent resource. But otherwise, we also have the attitude that we shouldn't have to live behind a fence, and we shouldn't have to change our entire way of ranching in order to accommodate these bears, because these bears also need to learn to respect us and respect that we have cows there.
Great, thanks Trina. Okay, so I have another question that came in, and I'm going to pose this to Danielle or Kim in Bozeman, and it says, as a recreator, being in the outdoors and hiking, it will become a problem with grizzly bears that start to come into new areas. Will it become a problem when grizzly bears start to come into new areas where the communities don't know how to interact with them? So as a recreationist, being in the outdoors and hiking, will it become a problem when grizzly bears start to come into new areas where the communities don't know how to necessarily interact with them? And so, did you hear that, Danielle?
Unmute your microphone. Danielle, you need to unmute your microphone. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so the way I understand the question, you're talking if recreationists in areas that don't currently have grizzly bears are starting to get grizzly bears into the area. What kind of risk does that pose to them? Is that what I heard? The volume was really low. I want to make sure I heard it right.
Yes, that's pretty close.
Yeah, so I would say, so that's where groups like ours have a role to help people understand what the risks are when traveling and recreating in bear country. And absolutely, if people are unaware of the risks in bear country, they can't take the proper precautions to protect and reduce the risk of exposure to bears. So once folks in those areas or in new and emerging grizzly bear areas have that information, they will be safer. Nowhere can we be 100% sure that every person will be safe in every scenario, but the more knowledge that we're armed with and the more precautions that we take, the safer everybody will be. And the likelihood of bear encounters to begin with is also very rare, especially if you take those precautions. So it's all about balancing risk and being prepared when you know you're going into areas that will have grizzly bears or have bears.
Great, thank you. And Julie, I'm going to address this question to you because I know working in the forest with Forest Service, there are a lot of attitudes around predators, especially grizzly bears. How do you address these different viewpoints? What communication tips do you have? Maybe just address the first question.
I'm sorry.
How do you address the different viewpoints around the attitudes about predators like grizzly bears?
I think it's just, again, through this basic education, a lot of what we're doing with the Montana Bear Education Working Group. A lot of what they present and what we present as well when we talk to the public is on bear ecology and about bears as predators and about their conservation. So I think that we're doing that throughout our communities and throughout the Forest Service, mainly through this tool, through the Bear Education Working Group, seasonal technicians. And we target different events that target a wide range of people from all different backgrounds, from first graders to all different ages and different groups. So I know that, and Danielle may be able to speak to that better, but I know they get a lot of questions no matter where they take the bear trailer, or whether they're interacting with the public at a campground. They get lots of questions from a wide variety of the public. And that's what we're always trying to do to improve that and make sure that message is consistent.
Great. I noticed that Kalispell's is on live, so I'm going to go to Ms. Cortis's room, and if you guys have questions, go ahead and ask away, and we'll shunt them to whoever would be most appropriate. So, do you have questions there in Kalispell? Flathead High? They're thinking.
Okay, can you hear us?
We can! Yay!
Yay! All right, we've been sending them to you via chat. I think you've received at least 2 or 3 from us.
Okay.
But we can, the kids will shout them out too, so.
Great, since we can see you, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, come on up closer and then they can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you have your calves a few weeks earlier to make them less vulnerable to bears?
One more time, nice and loud.
Could you have your calves a few weeks earlier to make them less vulnerable to bears?
So we used to start calving the end of January, and so by the time the bears came out in March, they were at least a month old. But a month-old calf is still only 150 pounds. So because of the harsh winters that we've been having in the north, we actually pushed our calving back this year. So right now we have 3 calves on the ground. We just got started. And one of the things that we really had to consider was the bears, because the bears will be coming out in about next week. And so we'll have a whole bunch of baby calves to worry about. But we generally don't have problems with the bears when we're calving, when the calves are really tiny. it's when they're older and they're farther away from the barnyard that is the issue. And, you know, if you've ever seen a grizzly bear, they can take down an adult cow pretty easily, let alone a baby calf. So, I mean, even when they're 200 to 300 pounds, they're still really easy to kill.
Thank you. Kalispell, how many of your students are on ranches up there?
In this class, just one today.
Okay. Okay, interesting. So it's good to get that perspective that's a little different that the students may not have. Did you have one more question, Kalispell, and then we'll go to back to the live stream.
Okay, I'm sure we've got a couple. Zach or Bethany?
So our group was wondering, because part of the issue was that bears need like trees to like bed down in, and we were wondering if it would be a possibility as ranchers, because the trees are a lot of times in shelter belts and that draws them closer to houses, if it would be a possibility like plant trees and stuff out like further away from houses so they would be there instead of coming in close contact with your houses, which usually has calving pens and attractants.
That's a good question. So where I live, it's probably much like Kalispell. There's trees everywhere. And so they don't necessarily need to come near our house to be in the trees. But for the people that live further east, there's a lot of farms there that they only have shelter belts around their houses. So that is one of the big issues. And as far as planting trees further away from their homes, the problem is the east side of the mountains is so dry that you'd be hard pressed to get the trees to grow out in the prairie. The other issue, again, is bears are very adaptable. So even if there's no trees somewhere, they're going to find somewhere else to hang out. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's in the barnyard because that's where somewhere is to hide, you know, beside a building or a grain bin or whatever. And so that's a big challenge for people that live out further east than the front.
Great. Okay, Kalispell, we are going to go ahead and go. We've got some burning questions on the live stream. So go ahead, Lori.
Okay, so this one I'm going to address to, it looks like it's more of a question to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, so I'm going to address this to you, Gary. And it says here, Tim Manley said in his 2015 talk, and Tim Manley is a bear biologist with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, "Why is this bear in my backyard?" That was the name of the talk. That when grizzlies start breaking into structures, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is forced to put them down in order to avoid any further conflict. According to FWP's data, however, they often allow problem bears a second chance. How do these management personnel decide when a bear is beyond rehabilitation and when they get a second chance?
Yeah, what school did that come from?
That is from Barker Homeschool.
Barker Homeschool. Hey, great question. Yeah, how do we decide what we do with a bear that gets into conflict? There's a criteria that was set between Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has the authority because they are endangered species. However, one of the issues that we look at is human safety. And human safety comes above all other issues. If human safety is an issue, that bear usually is removed. Once bears start to break into structures, homes, there is, what we've found is that those bears seem to be conditioned to that because of food sources or whatever attractants bring them close to homes. And in certain areas, communities like Kalispell, Columbia Falls, once they are in areas where buildings are, there's so many attractants that they seem to be drawn to that we have to take a strong look at what that bear will do in the future. And when we determine that that bear has gotten conditioned to human presence, as Trina said, once they've become conditioned and not afraid of humans, that bear shouldn't be on the landscape. And so we make that decision. Now, if it is brought in close proximity to humans but has not caused conflict, we may trap and relocate. If they do, we do a 1, 2, 3 strikes, and it depends on the bear. If it's a young male, it isn't as important to the total population. We may take a little more aggressive approach to that. But if it's a female with cubs, we may take a less aggressive approach to it. So all those conditions weigh into a decision-making process that we concur with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service before we take action.
It's there.
Okay, I have a question coming from the Bitterroot, so I'm going to address this question to Mitch and Aaron. Where did he go? And maybe not. Hold on, we're getting there.
Well, it was about the Grizzlies coming back to the Bitterroot.
So yeah, the question, and we can't see it at this point, but the question was, how are you addressing the Bitterroot area and Grizzlies either potentially coming into that area or in the future coming into that area? So let's direct that to Aaron, and then maybe Mitch, you can comment on that after Aaron.
Sure, thank you. That's a timely question since there was a grizzly bear captured in Stevensville last year. Some of the things, our electric fencing incentive program has been applicable to the Bitterroot since we started it in 2010. So we have already started doing some, conflict programs in the Bitterroot. But the other thing is just working with partners to identify places to start outreach and education. So I know the Forest Service has been putting up signs for a few years now on identifying grizzly bears and black bears. There has been some Forest Service administrative sites, so campgrounds and things that have bear-resistant dumpsters and other such tools to try and minimize conflicts with black bears. But as grizzlies move south, we do expect that those similar tools will help to mitigate grizzly bear conflicts. The other thing is we're starting to identify hotspots. So sanitation is a big concern in the Bitterroot, and that is just garbage cans left out, garbage cans out all week, and black bears have been getting into them quite a bit. And so looking at the sanitation issue first and trying to clean that up and get that addressed would help both black bears, but also eventually grizzly bears. In 2017, the Bitterroot had some severe fires in the Lolo area. And so what we saw was our sanitation companies couldn't get to pick up garbage in those areas with severe fires because the roads were shut down. So now there's a bunch of black bears up there that have been feeding on garbage, got used to feeding on garbage year after year, and so the conflicts are really high. So this year we're actually working to try and address conflicts specific to Lolo and just take it one step at a time, working with the Lolo Community Council to start doing bear outreach education programs and others. So yeah, it's definitely takes a village to work on issues like that. Mitch?
Great, thanks. Yeah, Mitch?
Sure, I can add to that and complement what Aaron was saying there. I think that as part of the recovery process, we have to address conflicts and conflict reduction, and along with those lines, we need to talk about habitat protection and security as well. And so the work that Vital Ground does is really focused on that habitat protection piece of the puzzle there. And so this past year, we worked with grizzly bear managers, researchers, and folks alike to identify critical habitat needs across the landscape. And this went from basically Washington through Idaho, Montana, and eventually down to Wyoming. And so through that process, we were able to identify some areas that may link up the Bitterroot with the southern end of the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem or the Cabinet Yaak ecosystem. And one project in particular we discovered in that process was the recent acquisition we've done, or land purchase we've done in the 9 Mile area. We purchased a property right along the interstate at the confluence of 9 Mile Creek and the Clark Fork River, and it has documented bear use where a bear has traveled from the 9 Mile through the valley there and across this property under Interstate 90 and took a little saunter into the Bitterroots before it returned. And so, like I said, through the process, working with biologists and managers, we've identified areas where we can link up specific habitats across the region.
Great, thanks, Mitch. All right, so I have another question that came in from Corvallis High School, and I'm going to address you, Mark, on this one.
Okay.
And maybe you can speak more to the perspective of hunters.
Sure.
Personally. It says, how do you feel about the growing population of grizzly bears? how do you see it affecting your life in the future? Maybe you can speak to the perspective of hunters.
Sure. Excellent question. Well, the first thing to consider is, when the bear was first included on the endangered species list in 1975, we had about 136 bears in the greater Yellowstone area, and we're up well over 700 now. We've exceeded the population. Wyoming, Idaho than we ever had before. I know myself as a hunter, I'm starting to see bears. We're having encounters with bears where we never have in recent years. It's definitely having an impact on behavior of elk and other ungulates. And it's not just from, the behavioral changes are due more to just grizzly bears or wolves or mountain lions. There's habitat changes that we've been trying to deal with. But it certainly has had an impact on where people will find elk. We've had a significant shift in recent years of elk populations moving towards private lands, away from public lands, and so it's making hunter opportunity a little bit more of a difficult equation, and hunter success a little bit more difficult too. But I would defer to Nick as well. I know Nick and I have had many conversations about this, and I think we tend to agree on quite a few things. But do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think, there are a lot of factors about elk distribution. I mean, certainly the two-legged predators, humans, have a huge influence on elk distribution too. But if anything, I mean, grizzly bears, their reemergence on the landscape, and I will say that I've killed a lot of elk in heavy grizzly country and gutted them at night in the dark, and if anything, it's a psychological change. I mean, it certainly makes you think about it. I think hunters are aware of the issue. I see more and more hunters, even though they have a high-powered rifle, they have pepper spray on their belts, and I always do. I can't honestly say what I do in a close grizzly situation. I don't know, but the fact that hunters have it is just a sign that they're aware of the issues, and I think that's a good thing. I've left a lot of game on the ground overnight, always followed the rules, got it away from the gut pile, and been fine. But there could be a time where I come and find a grizzly bear on that. So, there's a lot of, we live in a predator-rich environment today, and the only reason we can have all of these species, mountain lions, gray wolves, black bears, and grizzly bears on the landscape is because there are prey for them. So there needs to be a balance. We manage ungulates like deer and elk through hunting, and we are managing gray wolves through hunting, and someday we will be managing grizzly bears. There will be a grizzly hunt in Montana. We think that's a good thing.
Great, thanks, Nick. So we're getting close to the end of our time together, and I want to just send out a message to the students that we're capturing your questions. Kalispell, if you could type in your question too, and we will get back to you at a later date, probably within the next couple days, in answers to your questions, because there's no possible way we can address them all. So I want to sort of close with this. I'm going to give the panel members an opportunity to say, after hearing all the questions that you did today, to give one sentence on what you would like the students to go away with from this session.
From your perspective.
And why don't we start with Aaron Edge in Missoula?
All right, it's a trend. I think if you take away one thing, it's that the grizzly bear issue is complex and diverse, and that there are lots of things to think about when you live with large predators on the landscape. And there are lots of people to sit down and listen to and talk about the issue, and that all perspectives matter. And that I think we sometimes are easily thinking about an issue in one way, but sometimes we kind of have to step outside of our boxes and think about the issue from a different perspective. And then also just keep your bird seed in when bears are out, and put your garbage cans in, please.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, Mitch, let's go to you.
Sure, I'll try and keep it to one sentence.
I know it's hard.
It is hard.
It's your elevator speed.
Yeah, thank you. So I think from Vital Ground's perspective, grizzly bear recovery requires two things. It's habitat protection and conflict conflict prevention. And I think this panel is a great opportunity for folks to learn about both of those techniques.
Thanks, Mitch. And let's go to Bozeman. Kim Johnston.
I can agree with both those guys on the same line. As far as prevention is very important, and it's important to look at all the different stakeholders and different opinions, because each of those different groups have a perspective, and it's important to hear everyone's perspective and work together to develop solutions. There's a lot of great tools out there for preventing conflicts, but it's important to bring everyone to the table to develop the right program for each community.
Great,
thank you. This is Julie, Forest Service. Again, it's going to be pretty similar to what everyone else is saying, but I think as individuals, just being aware of what you can do whenever you're in bear country, depending on where you go in the state, just educating yourself and then educating your friends as well. Whoever you're with when you're in bear country, I think that will go a long way to helping you reduce conflicts.
Thank you, Julie.
So my final thoughts, there's always something you can do to prevent or reduce the likelihood of bear encounters and conflicts, not 100%, but reduce. And the responsibility and burden of grizzly bear successful grizzly bear recovery doesn't fall on one group. So we're all a part of this, and we all have to take some responsibility to make it work for everyone.
Thank you, Danielle. And then we'll come here to Helena and Trina.
I would have to echo what Kim said. When I first started my bear campaign, there was no way that I was going to work with people like Nick Jivak because we just don't think the same. But over the years, I have learned that it's going to take every single one of us working together to get these grizzly bears managed to reduce human bear conflict as well as livestock bear conflict. And I can't do it by myself, and Nick can't do it by himself. And so it's going to take a group effort of everyone to get them where they need to be.
Thank you, Trina. Mark?
Well, from our perspective, it's all about the habitat, because of fire suppression, fractured land ownership patterns, and a lack of active forest management to maintain habitat. The bears are looking elsewhere to fulfill their habitat needs, and that's the source of conflict.
Thank you, Mark. Gary?
Yeah, I just want to reflect on the success story of grizzly bear recovery based on all the partners that have been involved since the beginning. And that success story now brings a new perspective on how we deal with grizzly bears on the landscape, and working with folks that we in the past have not really considered as a partner in this. The livestock industry, the communities, all those folks have to be involved as we move forward and as grizzly bear numbers increase and expand onto areas that we don't or haven't seen them in the past.
Thanks, Gary. And Nick?
Closely. I would just say that the recovery of the grizzly bears, I'm kind of echoing Gary, in the Northern Continental Divide and Greater Yellowstone are an incredible success that all Montanans should be proud of. We know how to live with bears in those areas. The key is learning how to live with bears in places where they haven't been in many decades. And I can honestly say that I don't know what it's like to be Trina and live with them. It's different when we go into these areas where they live voluntarily, recreationally. These people live with them, and if we don't work together, we won't achieve success. So those partnerships are essential.
Thank you, Nick. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining today. And students, once again, we have your questions, and over the next few days, we'll get back to you. I'm going to send them out to the panel members, and hopefully you'll get some good responses to help you wrap up your final projects. But thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing your projects.
Right, and we know there in Bozeman, we have Mrs. Homespech's class that joined us a little bit late, and they can stay a little bit later. So we're going to give you a minute or two to ask a question or two if you have them there in Bozeman. But if you need to, you can stay on if you'd like to, students. But if you need to go, we know it's class break time, so go ahead and sign off. But Bozeman, do you have, the live students, do you have a question for the panelists? They're thinking. Maybe.
It looks like the students are going to ask the questions after we sign off from here.
Okay, thank you, and we will see you, Bozeman, back at 10, right before 10 o'clock. So we've got about 9-minute break. So speakers, panelists, thank you so much. We have about a 9-minute break right now, and then you're on again. So awesome.